Now, Chastity, we were talking about before you got on about the idea of seeing patients up close and safety. And some of our patients may not have been within 6 feet of somebody else in a while, and now we're in their personal space. So I would assume that could be a uncomfortable conversation that should be addressed early on for patients. What thoughts do you have of that?
Yeah, that is a great conversation to be having, because that's something we have started to kind of create. Like, we now have this bubble that we like to have. Even when we're walking through the grocery stores, we're expecting people to stay 6 feet away from us when we're at any store by any means. And so now they're coming into the practice and we're going to be very close to them. So being prepared with having the conversation about what safety precautions we're taking and being able to all be on the same page with that, that's a big part, because a lot of us are coming into the practice and maybe we're still feeling a little uneasy about being there. Making sure that we're having a conversation with the team to get on the same page of how we're going to present what the safety measures are that we're taking, and being able to present that to our patients too, so we're able to reassure them. But it really starts with reassuring our team members as well, and making sure that we do all feel confident. Because if, as team members, if we don't feel confident walking into the practice and that conversation hasn't started there, our patients are also going to sense that as well. So if they're saying, why are you closer to me, or what have you done to make sure that this is safe, and we kind of like are staggering with an unsure response, it doesn't create that ease with our patients or with ourselves.
Exactly. And it's funny, I was just talking to a dentist this morning who was saying that the practices who've been open for emergencies are a little bit more comfortable with this conversation because they've been there. The ones that have been shut down, I mean, I talked to a team or an office manager yesterday who said some of their team members haven't been around other people. They haven't left the house much. So, like you said, Chastity, we need to make sure that our team members are comfortable with this, because that's going to come across in nonverbal completely. Even if we're covered, it's going to come across. Now, Christina, you guys are clinical, so you're used to the PPE. Those of us in the front are not as used to the PPE, and we're not wearing the same depending on the front and the back. So there might be some conversations from patients saying like, well, why is she not wearing that? What are your thoughts on that and how we talk about that to our patients?
Yeah, so like Chastity said, the first thing is making sure that your team understands why there's a difference in PPE. I've been reading a lot of posts on social media saying, I don't understand why, at the front office, we're not wearing the same as in the back. And so making sure that first your team understands this is why you wear this is why I wear this, and understanding that. And so there's some things that are required and there's some things that are recommended. So you may even have the doctor wants to wear the hair bouffants and the assistant is not, and they're working in the same operatory together. And whether or not your practice allots that, that's up to you, but your patients are going to notice it. And so if they ask the question, well, how come they wear that and you wear this? Practicing that, making sure that you call those things out in advance. So take a look at your practice right now, take a look at your protocols and say, okay, who's wearing differences? Why are they wearing differences? And this is how we would verbalize that to our patients. And that way everybody feels super comfortable with it, because they're going to notice it, they're going to ask. And it's so much better to be proactive and to, play this out with each other than to stumble across your words in front of a patient.
And I would say too that I've heard and seen through a lot of the different practices, we have to be comfortable with it. We have to be confident. We're actually a little bit more focused on it than our patients are, really. I mean, the patients that are coming to the practice right now are probably our lower fear level patients. They're a little less worried about it. They trust us, right? But you still want to make sure you don't want to get caught off guard. Just like you don't want to get caught off guard if somebody walks in, you don't want to get caught off guard when they say, well, why are you wearing that and you're not wearing that? So having that you may not even get asked because you have that comfort level. So now, Chastity, we were talking earlier about the big conversation I still see all the time is, do we charge for PPEs and what do you charge? And I had a coffee talk with Colleen Huff about the insurance part of it. And we actually have a list that we're keeping on, do the insurances pay for PPEs or not? But just in general, what are your thoughts around if you are charging for PPEs? Do we tell the patients up front? How do we have that conversation?
Yeah, I think that it sounds like you guys covered the most complicated part, is if the insurance company even covers it.
Right.
But then what it falls down to is it's going to fall down to the relationship component of it with your patients. So they're going to be seeing a new charge on their bills if you are charging for that. They're going to see a new charge on their bills that typically will come across as just like a personal protective equipment, which can be very confusing to a patient when they're saying, well, isn't this something that you've like always used before? That's not really a different thing. So having a way that you're creating that perception for your patient and explaining what that additional charge is for and being on the same page. So you're able to explain that to them and let them know without it feeling like it's just another thing that's being sold to them during this time is a big part of that. And I know it's a conversation that Christina's been having a lot heading into practices as well.
Yeah, because the practices are opening up, I'm having the conversation with them about if it's a choice, if they're choosing to charge the PPE code, I'm not here to say who should and who shouldn't, but if you are managing the expectations of the patient and how you're going to verbalize that to our patients. So just because it's called a PPE charge, is that how we need to describe it? So one thing that I've been recommending is actually describing it as a COVID-19 pandemic charge. And so during the time of the pandemic, I have this charge as an office visit charge. And the reason being, and describing to and explaining to your patients what it is. It's not just because, you had to increase the cost of your PPE. That might be internally why we are doing it. The reality is you had to increase the time of the appointments also to ensure that aerosols were removed from the practice, that you were properly able to disinfect, and to ensure your patient's safety. So if we approach it more from the patient perception, so informing them that for their safety, we've taken extra measures during the time of the pandemic, and we have a pandemic, fee during this time that's temporary, and letting them know it's temporary. It's just during the time of the pandemic. And people can understand that. I mean, you go to the grocery store and things have increased. My hairdresser finally called and said that they're opened up, but their fees are going up. Okay, get me in. I don't care.
I went to dinner last night and there's a 4% surcharge. I'm like, okay, I'm at the restaurant and I'm paying for something. One thing that if you're watching this and you haven't seen the interview I did with Colleen, that Colleen talks about when it comes to figuring out what your fee should be. If you've decided to charge a fee, what your fee should be is to be able to justify that fee. We have seen people say $5. We've seen people say $45, and it's like, you need to justify it. So what Christina's saying, I agree with 100%. Like, figure out the extra chair time plus the PPE plus the turnover. All of that gets factored into what that fee is. But then your team needs to be very comfortable to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah, so these difficult conversations, it's not about just with the patients, it's more about your team than anything. Because if your team can confidently say, this is why we do it, and they feel like it's the right thing to do, you're not going to run into a lot of problems. But really well, Laura, if you have anybody who doesn't believe in it, it shows.
Right. Which is part of the reopening. Like you said, you were in an office and you're helping them reopen. And it's not just the technical side, the PPE, but it's actually role playing these conversations. And I think it's really important, dentists. I mean, a lot of times when I talk to dentists, I'm like, let's role play. And they're like, oh, right. But you've got to be the leader. You've got to be confident in explaining this. And then you can't just rely on your team, and your team needs to be comfortable to say it in their own words. Christina might say it different than Chastity says it, different than I say it. And that's okay, as long as we all agree on what it is we're telling our patients. So definitely being prepared for that. All right. We were going to cover the top 5 questions. I think we're at 3 or 4. Chastity, Christina, do you have another one that you've been seeing out there a lot we should discuss?